Hi, and welcome to the Hytro Performance Podcast, where we talk all things BFR and performance. My name's Rich. Today, I am joined by my colleague Chase Latimer, who heads up sales over in the US for us, and a special guest, Mark Fitzgerald, who is one of our US practitioners. I'm not going to butcher this. I'm going to hand over to the guys to introduce themselves properly. And obviously, I want to start with Mark because we're really excited to speak to you today. Thank you so much for the time. Could you go over, give us a little bit of an introduction for anyone who isn't aware of you and what you're doing over there?
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Happy to be on and chat with you guys. Yeah, I've been a performance coach for longer than I can remember. I'm very fortunate to work mostly in professional hockey. I've been on both sides of it, both the team with a couple NHL teams, as well as the private side with opening my own facilities, having multiple facilities, and it kind of I think an interesting or unique somewhat of a journey in terms of kind of bouncing around a little bit and trying a lot of different things, working in a lot of different sports, and from team to private is such a big thing. Most of the time, if you're in the team side, you kind of stay in that lane, and not that I won't go back to it potentially, but I think my experience is, like I said, unique in that matter of being on both sides, playing both sides, and seeing the ups and downs of both, and having to navigate that. And obviously, at the end of the day, I'm an entrepreneur and working for myself, and I think that alone entails a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of bumps in the road, as you can say.
Sure. And Chase, the audience know you. You've been on our pods before, obviously, and you're an integral part of the Hytro team. But you and Mark know each other outside of the pod, right? How does that go?
Yes, I mean, similar to Mark, I started out on the professional side, working in professional baseball as a performance coach, and then transitioned more into a kind of private side, working for Scott Boris, really heading the performance division of the company. And that's where Mark and I first met. I had an opportunity to start working with some NHL guys in their off season. So talk about one of the biggest contrasts that you'll find in pro sport going from working with elite professional baseball players to elite NHL athletes, two very, very different sports, very different animals. And I mean, one thing that stuck out to me with Mark, and this was something I think that you gain when you're on both sides of it, from being on the performance private facility side to the team side, is that connection with the team connecting with the performance facility and trainers, right? Because the more collaborative approach that you can have, the more you can blend kind of philosophies and blend training from off season to in season to off season. That consistency for the athlete is so critical. And that was one thing I always admired about Mark, is he came down to the facility, jumped right in coaching. Like, I think we both had similar personalities. You just don't always get that. And at the end of the day, what matters most is the success of the athlete. And I think when you have folks that can collaborate like that, it's a pretty unique scenario.
Just recently, Mark, you actually had some Hytro product, and you guys were using it, introducing it to some of your athletes at one of the camps. So that's why we wanted to jump on and learn as much as we can. But I think you've both touched on it already. And my first question is actually, given the broad range of experience that you've had in your career already, um, what is it that you think you're noticing and you're able to deliver to athletes that other coaches and practitioners are probably just missing?
Well, I don't know if it's something that I do that others aren't doing necessarily. I think there's so many good coaches out there. You guys have had on some of the best, and I think everybody brings a little bit of something different to the equation, and the ones that don't, well, they're not going to be on podcasts, right? So I think for me, and this may sound arrogant, and probably will, but you know, my value is me. My value in a room with an athlete or athletes or a group, whatever, is me, right? Like, and again, it's not from a place of arrogance. It's from a place of knowing what I'm good at, knowing when I need to, reach out or bring some other practitioner in, or just, hey, I don't know, and ask a question, or be humble enough to say that I don't know. And I think having the ability to say my value is me, my experience, what I've seen, where the mistakes that I've made, and I think that to me is what makes me valuable. And I feel I feel confident in what I know now and the things I am learning and the mindset I have of like just chasing curiosity.
Yeah, you can't cheat wisdom, right? That's
No.
that's it. Like hindsight and wisdom is the value.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, can you give us a little bit of a background on KHP and kind of what the day job looks like at the moment?
Yeah, day job is kind of seasonal, I guess. When we were chatting about it before, I have seasons of coaching. Our Kelowna High Performance, which is where I live right now on the west coast of Canada. What we started is, a hub in Western Canada for NHL athletes. We started with, 5 to 8 guys, maybe during COVID, so it was kind of a weird start, obviously. And it's grown now to we'll have over 35, 40 guys visit us this summer. When it comes to KHP, it's been an evolution. It started as a certain thing during COVID, and now it's building into a destination place for these guys to come and to buy homes and to we've had 5 or 6 guys buy houses last summer, which is awesome. We have a couple getting married here this summer, which again is awesome. We're starting to really build out our network, and yeah, it's exciting, and it's kind of cool to be a part of. I like starting new things. I think that's the entrepreneurial side, right? I'm always thinking about those types of things, which can be good and bad, or positive and negative. But for the most part, it's been a great experience.
So we built out this amazing kind of performance environment. We're sat on years of wisdom, and then I mean, if we get to what we love and what we're here to talk about, blood flow restriction, you've actually been using it like longer than Hytro's been around, right? You were saying earlier, 10, 11 years is kind of the introduction to BFR. Like, how did that happen for you, and how did you first start introducing it?
Yeah, it was interesting. A colleague in California kind of introduced me to it in a way. Some more simplified apparatus where it was like a self pump, and I didn't really know what to think when I first saw it. And I had seen it, on the internet, which is a dangerous statement to begin with. And I was pretty skeptical, and because from big picture, there's way more information about it now, probably in the last 3 to 5 years, than there probably ever has been in terms of information that's out there and available to digest. And at the time, when my friend introduced me to it, it was more just like he threw a couple on my arms, and it was more just like I couldn't believe the feeling. I did it myself. I was just working out with him, and he just kind of like do this as a finisher, like 15 minutes, and I did like arms basically, push-ups, shoulder raises, tricep, whatever. And I could not believe I could not believe the feeling that I got, and like just the effect of it, and it stayed. Like it took them off, and the next 24 hours, even longer, I was just like, oh my God, what did I just do? And what is it? And he gave me a set, and I just started messing around with it. And I didn't, for me, it's one of those things where I'm going to test something out. I'm going to do my homework before I put it on someone whose job is to play a sport. I want to make sure I do my due diligence, and but it was an interesting first kind of exposure, and it was something that just had me so curious because I only did stuff for 10 minutes. Like I did my workout ahead of time, and
Yeah.
typically I wouldn't do some of the things that, is more bodybuilding type stuff, but there's value in it, right? And for me at that time, I was in my 30s, and it's like, okay, well, I can't go crazy like I did in my 20s, but I still want to train, I still want to push myself. And I found it as a way for me personally to just add that extra little bit that I wouldn't normally do. And the effect
Mm.
was, in my opinion, just incredible. And the feeling and all those things that we now know is created with that type of work, right? So it was, yeah, that was kind of my first introduction. And then I just started playing with it and researching it more and asking more questions. And then, it started to really pick up in the next couple of years. And I saw my first, I think it's the Owens, with you're walking around with a cart and stuff. I'm like, well, that doesn't seem, yes, there's a application for sure. But then I started to learn about like, oh, you have to stay, 30 seconds on and this and that. And like that, you have to stay like this. And I was so skeptical right away because I guess that's just the way that you think about it. But it goes back to that, and I'm going to butcher this, but the 3 sets of 10. But why? Well, someone just put it on the whiteboard one day, and that was a thing, right? Like I know it's not that
That's how
simple,
that's everything. Yeah, yeah,
but
probably.
it kind of is, right? And so I was skeptical about the actual methodology or the actual execution of the movement, because that didn't make sense to me. I didn't find that you need to stay within those parameters. Obviously, I wanted to be respectful and do my own homework on it, but to me, there was room for something more there, if that makes sense. Like I didn't want to just. I guess that's why I work for myself too. I don't like listening to people, but I felt like there was more to be learned about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I want to tap in on this a little bit because a big part of my background and when I was working for Scott Boris, working with athletes, we get question. Part of my job was to consult them, and they'd bring new products to me. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this supplement? Hey, I saw this player doing this, right? And I think as a coach, you have to develop a healthy skepticism, right? To kind of weed out the BS. And for me as a coach, BFR was one of those that I was less aware of in terms of traditionally it sat in the rehab space. And there were, I think, some safety concerns and some parameters that were so strict that it kind of scared me off from exploring it. And I think it wasn't until I actually started just using it myself, right? One, we got to have a foundation and a baseline of understanding. There are some parameters that we want to live within, but it's not black and white, right? So like to elicit a hypertrophic response, right? 8 to 20 plus reps, right? So that's our range, right? Like you said, 3 sets of 10 on the whiteboard. Why? Because somebody wrote it. But does that mean that is where we absolutely have to live and we can't get outside that? Absolutely not. And I think, some of the points that you've made, what makes great strength coaches is that curiosity. If I can experiment with it myself, right, and it's safe, like there is certainly an openness to start to explore a little bit more, but I think a lot of coaches are just a little bit apprehensive because it kind of can sound or be scary. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about your experience around it and kind of that adoption and your willingness to explore. And I don't want to say ignore some of the parameters or misconceptions, but to just kind of have that mindset to be curious and explore.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I've done some presentations on BFR because I was asked to, because it was, and not to say that I was the only one doing it. I know I wasn't. However, I think I was one of the ones that was doing it and maybe talking about it a little bit more, or creating some buzz around it a little bit more. And one of the things that has always come up is occlusion versus restriction. And I think that's a good place to start, because to me, occlusion is, some of those other more restrictive devices that, you have the parameters for the 30 seconds on, 50, whatever that is. And it's typically wrapped in medical and it's looked at as, post-surgical and whatever. And I think there's a role for that. I think it's great. I think that it has a place. And to me, that place is probably more, immediate post-surgical, with, ACLs, like those types of like big injuries and what have you. And that's just my own opinion. That's more on the occlusion side, where we're really trying to get at pinpoint something that's happened in the leg or the extremity. Whereas restriction to me is way more wide open, right? And it has like so many different applications. Like you said, you're lifting a little heavier. Like I think what I've done with BFR has changed dramatically. I used to see it as more of just something I did at the end of the workout because I was still playing with it. Whereas now, unfortunately, I have a couple young hockey players who just had shoulder surgery, and we're going to spend a lot of time in BFR, wearing their shirts in the pool. I do a ton of pool work with our athletes because for a number of reasons, but that has been probably my primary usage of it recently, because I tend to go into a lot of long-term rehab with clients, and people come here for rehab because we have such a great team of practitioners and what have you, and we have access to the pools right across the road from our gym. And so I'm a big proponent of what we do in the pool because it's no impact. We can get a lot of work done with minimal invasive or potential harm exercises and what have you, and it's undercover very, very difficult, or at least it can be. And to me, I think you have to start with that and understanding what occlusion is and what restriction is and how you use each of those, and they are different.
If rehab and hypertrophy was almost like the gateway drug for BFR for you, what was it then in your self-testing and experimentation with athletes? What was the thing that shifted for you to be able to make it maybe a tool about readiness and repeatability and potentially even recovery?
I think I started to realize that 10 to 15 minutes of, I call it, like Chase and I have talked about this, like setting the table, like warm-ups. And I work with a wide range of athletes in terms of age. We have guys in the gym who are in their 17th season in the NHL. Multiple surgeries on different parts of their bodies. They've been through the ring.
No teeth.
Yeah, no teeth. Yeah, or fake teeth. Lots of fake teeth. So, putting guys like that through the traditional, pre or dynamic warm up or whatever you want to call it, glute activation, which is a great one. Doesn't really elicit the same response as you would hope, right? And I think with an older athlete, and obviously I'm older than pretty much everybody that I work with. Well, yeah, everybody. When I'm using it on myself, I'm realizing if I wear this for 10 minutes prior to my lift, how much better I feel. And that's just my own experimentation, but it was interesting. I'm like, oh, like I feel more ready to do stuff. I feel a little bit more athletic. I feel like things are happening that don't normally happen with my warm up. My warm up would typically take longer to feel like this, or even at all, like not even close, right? So I think for me, it was the realizing that, oh, if I wear them before, I can actually set the table to do better and create a better environment in my body to kind of like say push myself more or kind of like up my capacity, if that's the right way to say it. I realized this while rehabbing somebody who had some chronic patella tendon irritation. Quads were too tight, and he had some knee problems, some patella tracking issues. So I started saying, you know what, we're gonna start this with some treadmill walking, some backwards walking on the treadmill at an incline. We had this pretty cool treadmill there for a summer, and he did it for maybe 8 to 10 minutes prior to lifting, and that is the only way that he could get through his lift. And it started to open the door, and I was like, huh. And we do it a little bit afterwards as well, and he'd come in the next day not as sore, and it took a little bit with any good training modality, and all of he went into that season with no knee problems. And when he did have flare-ups, he'd go back to the treadmill walking with some BFR, and it cleared it. And I'm just like, among other things, with good treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But that to me was a big eye opener as well. So self experimentation, and then starting to implement with cases that they're hard to solve, right? Maybe you look for modalities that you can integrate into this, and hey, will this solve this problem, I wonder, right? And that, again, it's not going to hurt him. If we did that the first day and he was gassed, and okay, learn my lesson. We can't do that pre-lift. But what we learned was it actually set him up to really feel so much better during his lift and achieve so much more. So it was pretty amazing.
But do you think hockey generally is a sport where there is appetite for innovation and trying new things and adopting new tools? Because like you get the benefit of, I get you both have it right, the multi-sport experience, but then you're going to see it from different points of view, right? Chase is maybe the one suggesting, hey, let's try this, and Mark, maybe you more with the weight of athlete opinion on your back as well. Chase, what's your first thought?
I think there's more appetite from NHL athletes to try new things and innovative things. And I think from a high performance standpoint, a lot of it is about margins. Where can we make up some of those differentiating margins, those 1, 2, 3% that make the difference of playing 82 games or just getting out on the ice when the puck drops and I got my legs under me. I feel good. And we've got some good research around fatigue resistance, and it's not just us but others, and it really has the ability when using it as a primer, or what I like to steal from Mark, that table setter. to one, because you get some of that analgesic effect. So in hockey, you guys are getting beat up more than a lot of other sports. So being able to mitigate some of the pain, but just bring that life and that ability to access those ranges of motion quickly. And what's one thing that athletes hate to do? They freaking hate to warm up. What does everybody hate to do? We hate to warm up. If you look at batting practice for MLB and you look at the warm up, like half of it is guys just laying on the ground, and it's just, and you have to do it multiple times a day. So if we can get the body right and we can prime you, and it actually opens up your ability to perform at a higher level in that subsequent task, like, let's go. So long story short, I do feel like there's more openness from NHL athletes to explore and to be open to things like this.
I feel like the NHL is, or hockey in general, is still kind of like early on in terms of like ingrained training, right? Like, and there's still, which again, for me, I think that relates back to the athlete's willingness to look at different things. Sometimes positive and negative that come with that, there's people that, oh, I don't lift heavy. What does that mean? Like that's not that's whatever. I'm not going to go down that hole, but I think it leaves like this athlete, this hockey athlete, a little more adaptable, a little more open-minded, and looking for what are other things I can do. As an example, when I first started with, my first big client was Adam Foote, who's a NHL defenseman. I'm assuming he'll be in the Hall of Fame at some point. He's the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks now. He was won everything, Olympics, Stanley Cups, everything. And he is number one. He's the most competitive athlete I've ever been around. He'd come home from the summertime and he'd look me up and down. He's like, "What are you benching?" And after I kind of figured it out, I'm like, "More than you," and it just like, that's how our summer would start, and he's, you talk about a warrior and a guy who played the game a certain way, just amazing. And, when I first started with him, we had 12 Monarch bikes in our gym, those old white and blue, it's like a hockey thing. And, twice a week, I'd have to write up rides. So they'd get on the bike and ride for anywhere from 30 to 75 minutes, and just awful, awful stuff, pacing and, resist, whatever. And I remember, like, why are we doing this? Like, why? And it's in hockey, it was, well, this is what we do. I'm like, but why? I came from football where 2 times a week at least we're on the track, we're sprinting, and for Adam, he was, I started with him in the '06 Olympics leading up to that. And he was pretty broken by then, like multiple knee surgeries, elbows, shoulders. So like we had very limited, he still trained like a madman. But I remember my first day with him when, I was a little green, a lot green when I first started working with him. And after the workout was over, I'm like, let's go do some sprints because that's a good idea. And I kind of, I wouldn't say I beat him because he's a pro athlete, but I came a little too close because I just sprinted with him and he didn't like that. So that meant that we did more and we went harder, et cetera, et cetera. He came back, he was not good the next few days. And his chiropractor came up to me, he's like, "Don't fucking do that ever again." Like, okay, yep, got it. He's like,
Yeah.
he rides a bike for a reason. I'm like, got it. Like, so, luckily, but that's just the way they're built, right? His mindset was like, I'm doing this. I don't normally do this, but I'm doing it. So the whole biking thing, I didn't think it was productive as sprinting. So one of the things that I think got me some more notoriety, or people asking more questions, was like I started taking the hockey guys to the track because that was my background, was football, track, like that's all we did. And all of a sudden our guys are, improving in their skating, and because it's full hip extension, full flexion extension, as opposed to the bike, which is not, right? So all of a sudden we're opening the door, and I'm not saying I was the only one doing it. Obviously there was others doing it, but we stopped doing ladder drills. We stopped doing like stuff like I just didn't see a whole lot of point in doing. And we started sprinting. And some of the stuff we did was dumb. We were doing repeat 400s and like dumb stuff. But we did do a lot of sled dragging and sprinting, weighted sprinting. And all of a sudden it just kind of like opened the door, and our athletes started getting a lot better because they'd never been really exposed to that before. So going back to the bigger question, yes, I think they're more willing because of their, it's not, now it's a little bit different, but it's not really fully integrated. Even now, like the best gym guys in our camps aren't necessarily the best hockey players. They're actually not, like, but they all know that this is part of it now, right? They all know that. I don't think there's, you know, like in the NFL, it's kind of like that bench squat clean, like it's so ingrained, which in hockey, I don't think it is yet, which again, I think is a good thing because it leaves the door open to being more willing to try new modalities, new ways of doing things. And, um, you know, I think it'll continually improve and it will get more ingrained, but I don't think it's a bad thing either.
Yeah, I'm gonna just really quick. I know we're laboring on this one, but it kind of brings me back to how Fitzy and I got introduced to each other, which we're working with, and I'm incredibly fortunate to have been able to work with Ryan Getzloff, who, and again, another future Hall of Famer. And I remember Getzy basically, he was, didn't have this like old training age. He used to use training camp to get in shape until one year he was like, oh my God, these guys are skating circles around me. It's time to do something, and we were, and this is probably why you and I got along so well, is like, we do acceleration sprints early on, and we do hill sprints, and, we do a lot of sled work. And, you got to recognize that these guys are not sprinters, right? So we can, do more harm than good if, we're not being very intent based and understanding, the physical limitations and capabilities that they have. But for me to be able to get a guy like Getsy to run up a hill and, who literally looks like a tank when he's running, um, it shows you their kind of openness. One, again, trust is earned. You can't get anybody to do anything outside of their comfort zone without that built-in trust. But I think, yeah, again, long story short, you're going to have, I think baseball is probably one of the more, I don't want to say closed-minded, but protective, because of the nature of the sport. Um, but we're definitely seeing, whether it be new training modalities or BFR, it's really being opened up quite a bit more.
Well, I'll add on to one piece just because of Getsy. Like what I was fascinated with him is his athleticism is just like through the roof. As part of our pregame warm or his pregame warm up, him and I would throw the football. We'd find some space in whatever arena we were in and just zip the football around. And I could throw it pretty good just for whatever reason, I don't know, but he was a guy that just like it was so effortless. Effortless. He just zing a ball 30, 40 yards. I'm just like, wow. Like, okay. And then you hear obviously he's a scratch golfer. They went and did batting practice with the Angels one day, and he's the only one to hit a home run. And I'm just like, okay, well, there's got to be something there. He just doesn't lie. He just doesn't love training, and most of the guys don't, and that's fine. I don't care. Like, they're not going to be gym rats, but can I get them via trust to respect it enough to be diligent and to do things, whatever, right? Like that's a whole other thing, but for him, it was just like, hey, man, you're an athlete. You need to do athletic things, right? You need to open up your hips more. Like I have a note here, like skating itself is unnatural, and he was actually a really good skater because being 6'3", 6'4", 220, he's a big body, but he was actually a really smooth skater. And skating itself is unnatural, right? So one of the best ways we've learned to um, affect skating is by sprinting off the ice, because you're getting into those similar ranges of motion. You're getting at that propulsive force. Obviously, skating is different with the carbon fiber boots and the frictionless ice, but there's ways to talk to a guy like Getsy and say these two things. If you're going to do this off the ice, it's going to benefit you here. And he was, an intelligent guy, and he gets it, right. He understood that he needed to do it, right. And I think that's a difference there too. They're a little more willing to criticize themselves and realize what they need to do as opposed to just doing whatever in the gym.
Yeah. I mean, true to form here, we've successfully gone down some pretty deep rabbit holes. And
No,
Rich,
no, there was some great stuff. And one thing I really want to ask is you both touched on like training age. So over in Europe, we see a huge difference between like the most obvious like soccer and rugby, and potentially why there's more soccer injuries is because those guys haven't done the work to set the table and have good foundations and be strong enough to continue with the game. But we also don't have that almost unique hockey um, template that you're talking about there. Is when you both spoke about different sports, the hockey guys were the most beat up, probably carrying the most surgeries of all the sports you've worked on. But you also have guys who are going 17 seasons, which isn't maybe reflected in those other sports where they're less beaten up. So what is it for hockey players that you know helps them be so resilient, other than them potentially being on another level of mindset? And physically speaking, how do you as a practitioner keep them so resilient? And like, I mean, is that where BFR comes in as well? Because it sounds to me that resilience is probably one of the secret weapons of a hockey athlete.
Yeah, totally. And I think, the game has evolved a lot. I talked about a guy named, Adam Foote who played, he's a defenseman who played a heavy game. If you came near the net or near his corner, you knew, right? And he wasn't the biggest guy. He's probably 6'2", 225, still a large human, but not, ridiculous by any means. But he played physical and clutch and grab, whereas now, it's way more of a skill, speed, dynamic, good and bad of that, of course. But I think the resiliency comes in, again, I think it goes back to, for me personally, it goes back to realizing what is the goal. The goal is 82 games or as close to that as possible. The goal is longevity in the sport. I work with a guy named Luke Shen who's played for, over 1,000 games. I think he's probably 15, 16 years in the NHL. I had him as a rookie when I was working for Toronto. And, not a guy who is, super gifted in terms of athletically. You compare him to a Getzy who could probably play another pro sport if he wanted to. His family background, his mom's I think was an Olympic volleyball. His brother played in the CFL. Like there's some lineage there. And Luke, a lot of injuries, but he's so resilient because he's learned how to understand what his body needs. And that's one of the cool things that with a lot of the athletes I get to interact with is they come to the table with their own, information and curiosity and like a guy like Luke will will poke and prod with really good questions and hey, why are we doing this? Which I love, and because if I don't have the answer, I'm going to say, you know what, man, well, not that I won't have the answer to that question necessarily, but he'll come with his own curiosity, which I think is a big piece to his resilience, and he's a guy that's had some issues and we've modified a lot. And he's probably one of the bigger proponents of BFR is because he realizes how good it feels and he's able to do more. Like this past summer, he sprinted and jumped all summer and he surprised himself. And that doesn't sound like special, but if you know the history, it is special because he's now able to go down that pathway and keep his career going because he's still, playing at the level that he should. A lot of it is obviously his credit because he's so smart within the game. He knows how to play his game and he's valuable for that to that point. But I think the resilience piece comes in their own kind of curiosity. A lot of the guys that I get to work with have that. They're willing to say like, I need this. But they're also willing to be open enough to hear my opinion on it and to, okay, let's build your program together. And here's the why of why I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Here's why we're going to do these things. Here's why you're going to take a rest day today. Like you're not coming in today. Like just, go do something else. Go get a massage. Go do the, and that's part of the process too. But I think, the resilience of the game is understanding what you need as an athlete and then having a coach or people on your team. And this is something that I say to our athletes all the time. Like, I work for you. I don't work for your team. I work for you. So if you need an opinion, if you need something outside of the team, I'm going to help you do that because I work for you, right? And all I'm thinking about is your best interest, not the interest of the team. And that, again, it's not meant to be taken negatively. It's just more around, what's best for them and what's going to get us to that goal of the 82 games and the career longevity.
when you have those athletes that ask the questions, and perhaps maybe you've introduced BFR, what are the responses and questions you're getting from these guys, and then how do you respond? Because we kind of like have our way of how we discuss BFR, but like at the coalface in reality, like what's the language you're using for this is how it should feel, this is what it's doing.
Yeah, and I think, and right or wrong, one of the ways that I describe it that tends to click with a lot of our athletes is, I said, when I look at our tissue, especially, an older guy who's maybe got some achy knees and who's maybe had a surgery or, something like that, who's got, that just the miles, right? The miles on the body. I said, like, I look at that tissue as being dry, especially first thing in the morning, you're coming into the gym, the tissue is dry. So when we put on the shorts or the shirt and we start to restrict some of that blood, what's happening in my brain is we're pushing new blood to that area. We're pushing nutrients to that area. We're kind of like greasing stuff, right? We're getting greasy. And this, the guys make fun of me for saying stuff like this, but they'll have group chats that are called things that I say for some reason. But Grease in the Groove was this summer's group chat. Yeah,
Nice.
good. Which is great. I'm good. I don't.
Whatever
Yeah,
sticks,
okay.
right? Whatever makes you remember what I'm
I don't care.
saying, that's
So
fine.
Grease the Groove. It's like, okay, like, and it, for the most part, clicks with them. It's like, okay, that makes sense. Like, my knees feel achy because there's not enough stuff going on in them, and then when I put these things on, they don't feel that way, right? And to me, it's as simple as that. We're not trying to reinvent anything here. We're trying to prepare the body to do some work, right? And if that work is made easier by 10 minutes of wearing these shorts and doing some exercises, then I'm going to do that, right? And I think that's the language that I've used, and that seems to be picked up more so than others. If guys are still more, or guys or girls are still more curious, I'll go down the what it's actually doing and how it's doing that and explain that a little bit more. But for the most part, a lot of them will say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, and hey, and I always say too, if you don't feel good or if you don't like it, no problem. We don't do it. Like, I'm not going to force anything, but 9.9 times out of 10, it's, yeah, I feel ready to go, or it feels different. It's like, okay, well, let's go now. Like, this is part of what you do now.
And what about and in Chase, you can take this if you want as well. What about because I love this idea of exploration and testing and not being restricted by what had been done before. Where are the opportunities for maybe on ice BFR? Like we've spoke a lot about the gym, but like what's the on ice opportunity like?
I mean, you know what? For me, we're still in the experimentation phase. We did it this past summer and during our camp, which you guys were a part of, which is awesome. And that one is going to be, and Chase and I've talked about this. That's like the sacred space, right? And I think what makes Hytro unique in that is, it's if they don't like it, all they got to do is reach in, turn it off, unclip, and they're back to normal. Which I think is probably the only reason, to be honest, why we had guys trying it, is because they knew if it didn't feel good or whatever, they could always unclip, or unvelcro, and that to me was how I kind of sold it, because I'm constantly marketing and selling, and I think when we had the first guy tried, he's like, yeah, like I go 5 minutes, try it for 5 minutes, try it for the first two drills, 7 minutes, and tell me how you feel. I'm going to bet that you feel a lot better. And then the same guy came off and he's like, yeah, actually, my legs were ready to go, but I hit that point where like I had to undo them. I'm like, that's fine. Like you now know, maybe it's one drill, maybe it's just 3 minutes of just skating around pre first drill, or whatever. And then I experimented with a few guys. We're like, okay, turn them back on at the end and do a little bit of conditioning. Like nothing too crazy to start, but just like, and so we had some guys that did that. And again, it was cool because I think we're fortunate here with our group where they like the fact that Trav and I are always educating ourselves, number one, which I think most coaches do, hopefully, but we're always experimenting, we're always trying to, and not in a way that, hey, try this and see if, no, it's just more of like, hey, we were looking into this method and this is why we think it would help. And let us know what you think, right? Like it's never a closed loop. It's always, you're part of this and don't force it on anybody. But at the end of the day, it's if we can make that skate's quality higher because of 10 total minutes of blood flow restriction, to me, that's a win. Because again, it goes back to these guys will run through a wall. I typically have to run to the ice in different days and tell guys to get off because they're doing too much or they're adding stuff to the recipe that's not going to be beneficial. And that's not a bad thing. It's always better to have to pull back than to kick in the ass. But, that is definitely something that happens in hockey. So if I can manage that better with tools like this, then I'm going to do that.
Yeah, there's a few different kind of use cases for BFR that have been put on my radar from other coaches in the industry, and some that were initially earlier on in my journey with Hytro was kind of like, ooh, I don't know. One of them being throwing with BFR for baseball players. Um, Another being, and this was Griff with the Falcons doing tempo runs with BFR. And then with like Potenza with the Sharks, he's like, I want to skate. I want to skate with this on, right? So you've got these coaches that are really trying to kind of push the boundaries. And again, I come back to margins, right? Is that you're only here long enough to be replaced. That's my wife's favorite term. She was a very high level sprinter, and
She says that to you. Hang on, she says that
yeah,
to
that's
you.
Red flag.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to. Now. I'm gonna have to actually think about that. I didn't think about it in that context, Rich. Thanks. Um, and when I hear that, oftentimes it's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's think through the mechanisms here and the safety of it, because we've talked a lot about some of the misconceptions and some of these strict guidelines, and like I certainly don't want to like understate like we do need to be safe with BFR. There are some specific safety parameters that we have to satisfy, which is also, I think, a big aspect of how we've designed the product to accommodate for that, which then allows us to now explore. And when one thing that was pretty profound to me is that when I went to work with Potsy in San Jose, and I'm watching these guys on ice, and I watch them pull their pads down, unstrap, pull them back up, and go, and how quick and easy it was. And it's like, this opens up some really, really unique opportunities here. And talk to Foley after putting it on, and he was like, "Yeah, I went like 10 minutes." I was like, "Whoa, dude!" He's like, "Yeah, it was a challenge, but he's like, as soon as I unstrapped and I got back to skating, yeah, there was a little like heaviness and fullness, but then within a few minutes, he was like, I was shocked. He was like, I felt explosive, I felt light, I felt all these things that we would expect, right? Understanding the mechanisms, and then we start talking. He's like, so the way I see it is we've got about 20 minutes for pre-skate, and then I go in, I get changed, and we come back and we play. And he's like, I'm going to play around with 5 minutes, 10 minutes of and we typically like to cycle, a couple cycles to get that flush reperfusion to drive blood in that tissue, deliver oxygen, nutrients, et cetera, which is going to fuel them for performance, as well as, grease the groove, right? Drive blood into the joints. It's like the Tin Man and putting that oil can in the joints. But that opened my eyes quite a bit to athletes are willing when we educate, and we do it in a way that they can, we're not talking over their heads. Like what you said, the tissue's dry. This is a way to fill that glass, right? To perfuse them with blood and so forth. Like if we can make it simple, intangible, and relatable, there's going to be more willingness. And all you really need, and this is what I really found, is that you just need that ability to explore, because the more you use it, the more the light bulbs go off, and the more it's like, okay, the parameters were this, but I prefer this because after I feel this much better. And all while in the background, there's some physiological mechanisms at play, right? That are going to help drive recovery, that are going to, help improve performance, while also just making you feel better on ice, or, being able to um, buffer lactate, right? I mean, when we look at a sport like hockey and the conditioning aspect and the energy system development, being able to tap into BFR on the ice for a top up at the end of a skate session, right? Those are margins that we can't like get with different modalities or in other ways. And those are areas that I feel that there's, you know, when we look at it, and I know this was me as an as a coach, and I had to learn and grow, was like I didn't want to leave anything on the table. Like, what am I missing? First, I didn't want to get halfway through the off season knowing that I'd just given you a terrible exercise prescription that goes against everything that you really need. So how do we take the guesswork? So, integrate force plates, have a better understanding of what they're good at, what they're not, what they need. Um, but then secondly is like, what am I leaving on the table? These are some of the best athletes in the world, and they deserve the absolute best. So where can I make some of that up? That's not only going to allow them to perform, but play, baseball 162 or 82 in hockey and have that long career. And we're going to go through times of the season that, joints are compromised. Guys are in hockey similar to baseball. I'm if I remember correctly, there's, post game lifts. A post game lift, whether it be baseball, hockey, basketball, it's a grind, right? After a good game, I might get more out of you. After a crap game, let's hit BFR, right? So one thing I'll segue into with the question. I know we're rambling, we're going on right now. I'm really interested to hear your perspective, Mark. If we look at where do you see, we've talked a lot about preparation, so we can probably cross that off, but talked a little bit about capacity work and conditioning and where some of that value is there. But in an in-season type of landscape, and you can maybe answer this second with the condensed schedule this year that everyone's facing. Like for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Recovery is going to be a big name of the game here. Baseball, 162 games in 187 days. What's one thing I can do that's actually going to move the needle physiologically to drive, recovery, but also maintain tissue health and tolerance? So when you look at the landscape of like a year like this with an Olympic year and a condensed schedule, where do you see BFR being able to provide value in a way that is not just a novel nice to have, but something we should be doing on a pretty frequent basis, if at
Yeah,
all?
I mean, I think, we three of us have talked before about what I do kind of with our athletes during the season. And, a lot of it is planning and a lot of it is like almost logistics around, games, practices, travel, what all that looks like. And I have athletes that are playing in the Olympics and athletes that are not, so there's two very different trajectories, right? The guys who are not playing in the Olympics, it's this break comes at, okay, if you're in a playoff position, it's a great time to kind of like refuel the tank, get some training done, obviously get some R&R as well, but really as a slingshot into the back half of the season or the last couple of months of the season. If you're playing in the Olympics, it's all about like leading up to that point and obviously performing well within the games and then trying to recover and come back from that. So, and you talk about condensed schedule, it is mental. Some of these teams where they would normally have, 5 to 7 back-to-backs, right? So you play in Toronto one night, you play in Columbus the next night type thing. So like the travel is just mental. And yes, private plane, all that, yeah, that's all great, but you're still getting to the hotel at 2 a.m. and trying to get sleep and et cetera, et cetera. So now, whereas this year there's up over a dozen back-to-backs with some teams, which is mental. You shouldn't have to do stuff like that. However, that's the reality based on the schedule and whatever. So, how I look at it is, okay, when do we have opportunities to enhance things like recovery? And obviously recovery is a general term, but, flight time, if you got a West Coast team that's flying across 3 time zones, and spending 5 hours in the air, well, you're going to throw the shorts on and for once an hour, you're going to do a little cycle. You're going to engage the straps and maybe you're going to move around a little bit. Maybe you won't. And then when you land Every hotel you go to, these crazy 5-star hotels, they have pools. Throw the shorts on, get in the pool. You're going to do this 10-minute routine. So what I'm looking to do is like minimum effective dose, especially in season, because number one, the teams have strength coaches and performance staffs that I want to have respect for, just like, Chase talked about that earlier. Like, I want to create a connection, not be the guy who's in the player's ear telling him not to do X, Y, and Z. That's not what it's about. It's about collaboration, and steering in a way where what's best for my client, but also benefits the team as well because he's being taken care of, right? And there's teams that I have great relationships with. I think I have good relationships with everybody. However, there's teams that are a little more accepting than others, which is totally fine. But you have to find those ways or those avenues to affect the athlete in a positive way. So flight and travel time. What are we doing during flight? What are we doing when we land? I'm a big proponent of the pool. No impact. Again, minimum dosage, 10 to 20 minutes tops with while utilizing BFR. You talked about post game, whether you're on the road or you're at home, there's something being done post game. Depending, obviously, there's circumstances where if you're leaving to another, like, you'd be shocked how fast a team is out of a building after a game. Like, I've seen it done in under 20 minutes. Like, it's just, well, at least it felt like that. You're trying to like get everything done and get on the bus. Like, you miss the bus, you're done. So like it's amazing how fast they move. So you have to have things built into the players' routines. Okay, if you're on the road, I know what equipment is available. Here's what we're going to do, and it's usually like 15 to 30 minutes tops, right? So how do you make the most out of that? In my opinion, if you have your hands or if you have the availability of BFR, that's going to make that work. You could probably cut that work in half and get multiples of the results, right? So why wouldn't you use it? And as soon as you have that conversation and around what you're doing and the why, the player's like, well, yeah, I feel so much better when I do that, right? And it's so, again, I think it's ongoing education as well in terms of just, hey, like, instead of just sitting on the plane and playing cards and not moving, here's what we're going to do. And some guys use like the compression boots and socks. Those are all great too, but I feel like this tool is just, the bang for your buck is just so much higher. So in season, I think there's so much on the travel recovery, kind of that side of it. But then on the training side too, it's like you're adding layers to the training. You're making the training just a little bit more. You're keeping a little bit more muscle. With hypertrophy work, you're pushing yourself in the conditioning without having to. We do still ride the bike, and there's some different bike rides that I use throughout the season that will, nothing longer than 20 to 30 minutes, to be completely honest, because I'm trying to manage. It's stress management at the end of the day, right? So it's, hey, you're going to put the cuffs on or you're going to engage the cuffs for 15 minutes, and you're just going to, nice easy pace, and that's just going to push that blood through that musculature through his whole body, and it's going to be kind of miserable. But again, the after effect of that is the next day when he has to play a game, oh, my legs feel great, right? And like, it sets him up for sprints the next morning to kind of prep his nervous system for the game. You know what I mean? Like, so I think there's so many interventions with that again, minimum effective dose and quality over quantity, because you have to operate that way in the season because the parameters are so tight with the travel and the games and and they, again, their goal is to play and perform in the games, right? It's not to make sure that they get their 4 sets of deadlifts in. It becomes very secondary. So I think if you can educate around the why and the intervention of tools that will make the training more beneficial and shorten the duration, it's a huge win.
Yeah, I think that really quick on that, there's like three big things that stood out to me. And one, I've always been a proponent of this, but movement is medicine, right? You already said one, we want to move. Two, blood, like, I don't think it's any secret that we want to increase blood flow, that natural perfusion, reperfusion, and drive blood, oxygen, nutrients into the tissue, right? And increase that blood flow, right? But then the other is volume. So it's a perfect opportunity. How do we combine that, right? If you're going to move, we add BFR to that. We're going to increase that blood flow, that perfusion, right? And then there's also opportunity to reduce volume, which in season, again, especially with the condensed schedule, right? And like, Brian Buck was on the podcast a little bit ago, a good friend of mine, and we talk about baseball's volume, right? There's so much freaking volume and there's so much hidden volume in warmups, right? How can we cut down warm up time? And take what the athletes are already doing and pair the BFR to get that flush reperfuse effect. But then again, there's some physiological mechanisms that are underpinning that are going to cause some different adaptations that are also going to drive performance over time, as well as maintain tissue health and tolerance that we typically don't think about necessarily as much. So I love what you said. And again, when we move and we pair some BFR to enhance that blood flow, and we're able to manage volume. I think those are three obviously critical aspects from a recovery standpoint, especially when you have such a high volume here.
We have gone longer than we thought, but it has been a great conversation. And I don't know about you guys, but like, hopefully it's not the last one. I think there's tons to unpack here. My last question for you then, Mark, would be, what one piece of advice would you give a coach or practitioner who is really trying to build that resilience in a hockey athlete? Like, it seems to have been one of the key things that you both spoke about cross sport, but let's look at BFR, let's look at hockey. What's the one piece of advice you'd give someone kind of like thinking about introducing BFR?
That's a tough question because it's there's a lot to that. I think one simplistic piece of advice is, and I think I'll say the advice and then I'll kind of expand a little bit, is really, do you understand the sport? Do you understand the sport? And whoever your client is, whatever level they play, understanding what level they're at, what kind of player they are, what kind of player they are looking to be, if they're a younger athlete or just drafted or undrafted, or and then where do they play? Is it junior? Is it NCAA? Is it Europe? Is it AHL, East Coast hockey? There's so many variants to that. And first understanding those parameters of the sport, of what kind of player do you have in front of you? What are their limitations? Are they a top six or bottom six? That's a hockey thing, right? Like, your top six are typically your best players in terms of offensive, production. Your bottom six, third and fourth line could be, still producing, but just different roles. Do you understand all those elements? And that's a lot right there, right? Is understanding what type of athlete you have in front of you. For me, after that, it's okay, athlete history, injury history, training age, as we spoke about, which I still think is a very misunderstood thing in our industry, and especially with athletes in general. And once you have all those, considerations in place, I don't see how you wouldn't want to put in BFR, because if we're talking about, Canadian Junior, which is 60 teams across Canada, the biggest feeder league to the NHL, the disparity you have there in training facilities, nutritional awareness, schedule. It's like mini professionals. They play anywhere from 3 to 5 games a week. They're traveling on buses all over the country. It's insane. You get a lot of the teams, it's gotten a little bit better, but that don't have strength coaches, that don't have, like, usually the athletic therapist is the equipment guy and the strength coach, and like, it's ridiculous. And some teams are improving for sure, because when you produce more players, you make more money, you win more, et cetera, but it's still not what it should be. If you were to compare, some junior team in Canada to Penn State or Notre Dame, there is no comparison, right? Because the facilities that those schools have, and the people that they have, and the resources, it is not even comparable. And you're seeing now in Canadian junior hockey, a lot of the athletes are leaving to go to those places, right? Some of the top players are doing that because you play half the amount of games, and you have access to everything that you would possibly need. You have a better setup than most NHL teams, right? So I think understanding the environment and the sport and the type of player that you have in front of you will lead you down the path of, okay, what tools are best for this athlete. And I would say across the board, not because we're talking about it, but like BFR is one of those staples for me, and I just sent, a couple of guys that worked out with us in the summer. They're heading into their draft year, and they messaged me like they're both losing weight. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the last thing that you can afford to do. So get your shorts out. Here's what you're going to do now. And they don't need equipment necessarily. Like they don't have a gym. It's, again, one of the best teams in the country. They don't have a gym. And I'm like, okay, so we're going to have to get creative, right? Like this is the type of problem solving that you're going to have to get into, which is why my blanket statement, like you have to understand the sport. You have to understand where they're at, right? They're in middle of Western Canada somewhere with, no resources whatsoever, right? And so how do we help those two put on the weight that they need, stay strong for a long playoff run, because they're going to be, playing until May, and then they're going to get drafted, and like it turns into a long year, right? So really understanding all those different aspects and saying, okay, what tools are going to be best? Is it going to be Olympic lifting? I don't know. I think that's going to beat the piss out of both of them because they're not going to be able to handle it. Now, you could argue that with me, whatever. I'm just saying, as an example, I think a tool like BFR it fits into, only beneficial for the majority of our hockey athletes. I wouldn't even say all of our hockey athletes. I feel confident in saying that because it's, like you said, Chase, it's a volume game. And if I'm just adding more volume just for the sake of adding more volume, something bad's going to happen. And it's not going to align with the goal of playing all the games and performing at the level that they need to. So I think, again, sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's a tricky one because there's so much that goes into it. And I think, again, BFR, again, I've been using it long before Hytro, but I know now that the integration, if you can make it easier, which is one of the reasons I reached out to Chase in the first place, was, oh, so now it's just like they're wearing the shorts anyways for our guys for the most part. It's just like, okay, let's just turn them on, right? Like let's just strap in and see how it feels. Like that removing that barrier, and instead of getting hooked up to a cart that you got to drag around, and I know there's a place for that. I'm just saying like that removing a barrier where it's obviously made easier and it's more simple and you already got them on, so like let's just go. Like to me that's such a huge win as well, like just convenience, right? We look at our world, right? Everything is convenience, and this is one of the ones that lines up very positively in my opinion. So again, I think it's when you understand the athlete that you have in front of you, you understand the parameters of where they play and the restrictions or the whatever that what they have access to. This becomes a tool that it should be in every gym bag, and it is for our athletes because they start to understand, the benefit of doing high quality work over just chasing volume.
I think, sorry, really quick, because it goes right in line with what you're saying is just to give an example, because obviously you've talked and we've talked about, every athlete's going to be different, right? Every athlete doesn't need a deadlift or power clean or whatever, right? Not every athlete's going to use BFR the same way, right? And I think it just falls right in line with a lot of natural principles of strength conditioning and how we work with athletes, understanding one, how they take in information, what they care about, what's going to work best for them, because you may have some guys that swear by using it for their prep work and some guys that are like, the only thing you're ever going to get me to do is passive recovery, that's it. And then some guys that are going to use it for the whole gamut. They're going to warm up with it. They're going to train with it. They're going to do everything with it, right? You're going to get varying degrees of utilization, and that's how it should be, right? We're not going to try and fit every athlete to say this is what we do with BFR. You will all comply, because we all know that's just, especially in the professional world, and I would say NCAA as well. I think when you give a level of ownership and autonomy to the athlete, you let them figure out what works best for them, and they get to explore it, then it's just like anything else in training with whether it be our exercise selection or, nutrition habits, sleep habits, et cetera. Everyone's going to be different, right? And they're going to need something different, and they're going to gravitate towards it differently. And I think just capping it off is like just having the open mindedness to want to explore, but also to learn, right? To learn and dive into the research a little bit, or reach out, ask for help. Um, and so I think there's obviously, when we look at resiliency, to your point, very difficult question. I think we're all trying to answer the question, and I think you did a phenomenal job of touching some of those main points, and just wanted to kind of top it off with some of those notes, just in terms of BFR, because that tends to be one of the fears, is like, how much is this going to get used, or do we fit everybody in the same way? And it's like, no, everyone's going to gravitate towards it a little bit differently, but the goal is to be able to try and get that stimulus frequently, and so forth. So just wanted to kind of give a kind of a top up there, or a few cents to kind of round us off.
Well, we have covered loads. Like I said, I hope it's not the last time we get to talk. I'm sure it won't be. I know I speak for Chase when I say we continue to learn so much from the community of coaches and practitioners that are using Hytro. We're working with so many to do research to kind of like help everyone understand how to use and apply BFR. But for now, at least, just want to say a massive thank you, Mark. Thanks, Chase. Thanks for everyone's time. This has been an amazing conversation. And for everyone who's been listening, stay tuned. Loads more to come. Thanks, everyone. This has been great.
Thanks, guys.